Have you ever met a woman whose silence is louder than any room? Not because she's hiding, but because she's home. At 60, she doesn't enter the space. She becomes the space. She doesn't chase the moment. She is the moment. And people feel it, in the way time slows when she passes, in the way conversations pause when she simply looks, in the way no one dares to interrupt her stillness, not because she's intimidating, but because she's sacred. This is not the kind of power that asks to be respected. It's the kind that makes respect inevitable. Look closer. She's not wearing youth. She's wearing truth. Not the kind you shout from rooftops, but the kind you whisper to yourself at night, alone in your bed, when everything else has fallen away. She has learned the most dangerous lesson a woman can learn, that she does not need to be needed, that her value is not in her usefulness. That love is not a currency to earn, but an essence to embody. This is what power looks like at 60. A woman who has unhooked herself from every performance. A woman who no longer plays roles: mother, wife, caretaker, fixer, peacemaker, unless they are chosen freely, not scripted by obligation. Her age is not a countdown. It is a climb, each year a rung toward the summit of self. She has walked through fire, not once, but over and over, not as punishment but as purification. She remembers the decades she spent trying to fit into rooms too small for her voice. She remembers being told to be smaller, quieter, nicer. She remembers waiting to be picked, and she remembers the exact moment she stopped waiting. It wasn't a dramatic act. It was a slow, sacred no. The kind of no that burns bridges not out of anger, but liberation. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. She has stopped dreaming. She has awakened. She has seen into her own soul, and stayed there long enough to not be afraid of what she found. At 60, she's not trying to impress anyone. She's not looking for love that costs her her peace. She's not seeking a mirror. She is the mirror. She is the forest after the fire. Scorched, yes, but also fertile. She is the sky before the storm, quiet, but quaking with truth. She is the ocean at dawn, vast, ancient, and unconcerned with how others navigate her depths. People call her mysterious, elusive. But the truth is, she's finally visible. It's just that most people don't know how to look. She no longer explains herself, no longer performs softness to be palatable, no longer shrinks to be held. If you cannot hold her in her fullness, she will not make herself smaller. She will simply leave. This is not bitterness. It's clarity. She's not cold. She's warm, but no longer flammable. The woman at 60 has faced her own shadow. She's not afraid of being alone. She needs solitude like oxygen. Not to escape the world, but to hear the voice beneath the noise. The voice that says, "You were never meant to be everyone's comfort. You were meant to become your own." And perhaps that is the most terrifying kind of power. The kind that doesn't ask. It simply is. Because what do you do with a woman who wants nothing from you? Not approval, not affection, not permission. You listen. You soften. You remember. You remember the part of you that once believed you could be that free, that full, that sovereign. And maybe, just maybe, something inside you begins to stir. Something old, something wild, something sacred. A seed that says, what if power was never about control? What if it was about clarity? What if aging was not decay, but initiation? What if you too could walk into your 60s, not afraid of becoming invisible, but ecstatic about becoming untouchable? Untouchable. Not because you're guarded, but because your peace is finally priceless. Because your time is now sacred. Because your soul has stopped making deals with fear. So, I ask you again, have you ever seen a woman at 60 and realized she's what you've been growing toward all along? She doesn't want to be admired. She wants to be left in peace, to create, to choose, to live. She's not a mystery to be solved. She's a revolution that cannot be undone, and the question that haunts everyone who watches her, but never dares to ask. What did she have to lose to become this free? But that is a story for the next time. And it begins not with a word, but with a wound. Are you ready to open it? Before she became the woman who no longer explains herself, she was the woman who apologized just for existing. Apologized for speaking too long, for being too emotional, for taking up space. She shrank, not because she lacked power, but because she was trained to survive. She wasn't taught boundaries. She was taught obedience, taught to be the peacekeeper, even when she was at war with herself. And so she became an expert at disappearing. Inside roles, inside silence, inside everyone else's needs. She didn't wake up one day empowered. She woke up weary. Weary from bending so far she could no longer stand straight. Weary from sleeping next to a man who hadn't truly seen her in years, maybe never. Weary from pouring herself into children, friendships, families, and finding herself empty at the end of the day. They say motherhood is sacred, marriage is fulfillment, devotion is noble. But no one warns you how devotion, when given without reciprocity, becomes erosion. No one talks about the loneliness of a full house, or the way your voice gets quieter when no one ever listens, or the way your eyes stop shining when the only person looking at them is looking through you. She knows this ache too well, the ache of being touched, but not felt, of being spoken to, but not heard, of being needed, but never known. She remembers the night she made dinner, wiped tears, paid bills, picked up shoes from the hallway, and still got asked, "What did you even do today?" She remembers smiling at gatherings, while her insides were a collapsing cathedral. She remembers being called too sensitive when she wept, and too cold when she stopped, because no matter what she did, she was always too much, or not enough. That is the wound that has no name. The wound of womanhood in a world that sees you only through the lens of how well you serve. And when she did speak, when she dared say she was tired, or sad, or confused, they called it a phase, a mood, menopause. They pathologized her pain, told her to take something for it, or worse, to pray it away. But she didn't need pills, she needed presence. She needed someone to sit beside her and say, "I see you." But no one came. So she learned to hold herself. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And for years, the things that seemed important to her, no one cared to understand. Her dreams, unimportant. Her sadness, inconvenient. Her anger, dangerous. So she tucked them away. Until the day came when her own soul grew louder than her silence. The ache could no longer be anesthetized. The mirror could no longer be ignored. And that's when the real pain arrived. Not the pain of being alone, but the pain of realizing she'd been alone all along, even in the arms of those who claimed to love her. She began to grieve, not a person, but a lifetime. The little girl who just wanted to be chosen. The teenager who made herself small so boys would like her. The young woman who believed love meant losing herself. The wife who swallowed rage to keep the peace. The mother who was always there for everyone, except herself. And the woman, beautiful, brilliant, burning, who got lost in the roles others needed her to play. She cried, not for what was gone, but for what never truly was. Because here's the truth that sears. There are losses no one can see. The loss of your own voice. The loss of your wildness. The loss of believing you were worthy of more. She wept for the moments she said yes when her body screamed no. For the times she let someone touch her out of obligation, not desire. For the nights she lay in bed wondering, is this all there is? She wept for the life she gave up to be good. And then, one day, the tears stopped. Not because the pain vanished, but because something deeper had awakened. Not anger, not revenge. Something holier, truth. The truth that no one was coming to save her. The truth that love should never feel like a debt. The truth that her soul was not made to be background music in someone else's story. And the most devastating truth of all, that the version of her who had tried so hard to be everything was quietly dying inside. And no one noticed. No one but her. So she made a decision, not a loud one, not a dramatic one, a sacred one, to stop betraying herself, to stop abandoning herself, to stop pretending this life, this half-love, half-heard, half-lived life, was enough. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, judgments, whispers behind her back. People calling her selfish, ungrateful, unstable. But she had finally understood the cost of silence. And she was done paying it. Because if she didn't save herself now, she would die. Not in body, but in spirit. And she had come too far to vanish like that. So she stood up. Alone. Again. But this time, not to serve, to remember. And though the path ahead was unknown, lonely, and terrifying, it was hers. And that made all the difference. The lies didn't start with her. They came wrapped in hymns, in family recipes, in Sunday dresses, and whispered warnings. They were passed down like heirlooms, worn like pearls around the necks of women who never dared to ask, what if this isn't love? They taught her that silence was grace, that endurance was godliness, that to serve quietly, suffer privately, and smile politely was the highest form of womanhood. She learned early that her body was dangerous. Too much skin was shame. Too much desire was sin. Too much voice was rebellion, so she shrank. Not from fear of the world, but from fear of disappointing God. Because they told her God was watching. But no one told her that God might not want her to disappear. That maybe God doesn't sit in pews watching hems and habits. But inside her, asking her to remember. That maybe divinity doesn't demand sacrifice. Maybe it demands truth. She believed in holiness. But she confused holiness with hiding. So she became a holy ghost. Present in every room, but unseen, unheard, unheld. And when the wrinkles came, when the softness of age set in, she felt herself vanish even more. Because this world worships youth like a god, but discards the women who survive it. They call her wise, but don't ask her to speak. They call her strong, but never ask how much it hurt to become that way. She was taught that beauty has rules. Stay small, stay pleasing, stay young. Don't be loud, don't be wild, don't be hungry. Because a woman who wants more than she's given is a threat. And so she tucked away her longings. She traded curiosity for decorum, desire for duty, pleasure for permission. And still, it wasn't enough. No one gave her a prize for her obedience. No one crowned her queen for being selfless. No one said thank you for the decades she poured herself into everyone else's life. She was tired, not just in body, but in soul. Tired of being good. Tired of being silent. Tired of praying to be chosen by people who didn't even know her name. And that's when the questions began. What if this isn't who I am? What if the God I've been taught to fear is actually the voice inside me asking me to rise? What if the version of womanhood I inherited was never meant to last this long? What if I am not failing, but awakening? She remembered something Carl Jung said. We all walk in shoes too small for us. And she looked down at the shoes of her mother, her grandmother, all the women who made themselves smaller so their families could grow. She realized she was still wearing them, still walking a path built on someone else's beliefs. But her feet were blistered. Her soul was bleeding. and she could no longer pretend the pain was just the price of love. So she sat down, took off the shoes, and wept. Wept for all the women who never got the chance, the women who went to their graves without knowing their own voice, the women who lived entire lives in kitchens and confessionals, without ever hearing the sentence, "You are allowed to choose yourself." She is not angry at them. She honors them. But she refuses to follow them into the silence. Because someone someday has to stop the spell. Someone has to say, no more pretending, no more performing, no more passing down the myth that a woman's highest worth is in how well she erases herself. She now knows it is not holy to disappear.
It is not beautiful to be quiet when your truth is roaring. It is not loving to stay in places where your soul is dying. It is not noble to raise children while burying yourself. It is not grace to wear pain like pearls and call it legacy. She does not owe the world her invisibility. She does not owe her family her silence. She does not owe the church her obedience. She only owes one thing now, her becoming. And in that becoming, she sheds every myth that ever made her feel small.
She lets the hair gray. She lets the belly soften. She lets the laugh lines deepen. Because this body is not a currency to trade. It is a temple that has survived storms. She no longer prays to be good. She prays to be true. And in doing so, she becomes the first woman in her lineage to say, "I will not die pretending I was happy." Because now, finally, she's free enough to tell the truth. And what happens when a woman starts telling the truth? What happens when she faces the shadow, not with fear, but with fierce compassion? What happens when she no longer runs from the mirror, but walks into it? That is the awakening, and it begins in the next breath. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And this is what she did. When the roles fell away, when the mirrors no longer flattered, when the house fell silent and no one came knocking, she met herself. Not the self others praised, not the curated version, not the woman everyone expected her to be. The other one, the one who had been waiting in the basement of her being, the one made of rage and yearning, of unspoken grief and unclaimed fire. The shadow, the wild twin she had exiled for decades. The voice she silenced every time she said, "I'm fine." She didn't find this self in a temple or retreat. She found her while folding laundry, while staring at old photos, while whispering "why" into her pillow at 2:07 a.m. And the shadow did not scream. She did not punish. She did not destroy. She revealed. She showed the truth behind the smile, the pain behind the perfection, the ache behind the caregiving. And for the first time, she didn't run. She sat. She breathed. She listened. To the part of her that still mourned the girl she once was, untamed, unfiltered, unashamed. To the part that once believed love meant losing yourself, and now knew better. She began to understand. What she thought was strength was actually self-abandonment. What she called patience was actually fear of confrontation. What she named loyalty was often silent self-betrayal. And as the shadow wept, she wept with her. Because the war had never been outside. The war had always been within, between the woman she was taught to be and the woman she was born to become. This is the alchemy Jung described, the individuation, not perfection, not enlightenment, but integration. She no longer wanted to be liked. She wanted to be whole. She no longer feared being too much. She feared being half. So she made peace with her shadow. She let the grief speak. She let the anger burn clean. She let the shame melt into understanding. And in that dark, fertile space, something bloomed. Not a persona, a presence. A woman who had faced herself fully and did not flinch. The kind of woman who doesn't need applause, because she carries her own approval inside her chest. The kind of woman whose silence is not emptiness, it's presence. The kind of woman who radiates clarity, not because she has all the answers, but because she's stopped lying to herself. And suddenly, aging didn't feel like vanishing. It felt like arriving. Like finally stepping into the temple of her own soul. Unaccompanied, unedited, unapologetic, she now walks differently, not to attract attention, but because the earth knows her weight. Not to be desired, but because desire begins inside her own skin. She is no longer the woman who fears solitude. She is the woman who chooses it. Because the company of her own soul is no longer too much to bear. It is sacred. She is sacred. And here, in the sacred dark, a new self begins to rise. But not as an image, as a force. She didn't rise like a phoenix. She rose like a forest after winter, quiet, rooted, in no hurry. Because her rebirth wasn't sudden, it was sacred, subtle, cellular. It wasn't a makeover. It was a remembering. She didn't need to reinvent herself. She needed to remove what was never hers. And once she did, she saw her body for what it was, not something to control, to sculpt, to criticize, but a vessel, an altar, a home. She ran her fingers over the soft skin of her belly and thanked it for the lives it held, for the heartbreaks it digested, for the quiet bravery of still standing. She touched the lines near her eyes and saw them not as signs of age, but as proof of having felt. She let her gray hair grow like wild lavender, not to rebel, but because she no longer needs to ask the mirror for permission. She no longer flinches at silence. She leans into it. She no longer fears being alone. She craves it. Because only in solitude did she hear her own soul whisper, "You were never meant to serve everyone but yourself." And now she wakes with a different kind of urgency. Not to produce, not to perform, but to live. To drink her coffee slowly. To move her hips to music only she can hear. To laugh until she cries. To cry without needing to explain. She is not healing to become better. She is healing to become real. And in that realness, she begins to love again. Not just others. Herself. She falls in love with the way her feet touch the ground, with the way her breath returns in the morning, with the way she can sit with her pain and not need to escape. This is not the love they sold her in movies. This is soul love. The kind that doesn't ask for more than presence. The kind that holds her hand when no one else does. The kind that whispers, "I'm still here. You're not too late. You've never been too much." She begins to wear her truth like silk. Soft, but undeniable. She begins to say no with gentleness. No to gatherings that drain her. No to roles that erase her. No to anyone who cannot see her as sacred. She does not ask anymore. Will they like me? She asks. Do I feel alive in their presence? She blesses her space. With incense, with music, with stillness. She surrounds herself with what nourishes. Books, wind, chants, her own laughter. She lets the seasons move through her. She rests when her body says rest. Moves when her spirit stirs. Creates not for applause but for expression. And in her rituals, the tea she makes slowly, the candle she lights before writing, the walks in the late golden hour, she is rebuilding something ancient, something no one else can see, but everyone feels when she enters the room. She is no longer proving, she is being, and that being is the revolution, because a woman who has stopped apologizing is a woman who changes everything. And now she walks the earth not to be seen, but because her feet belong to it. She touches others not to be loved, but because she is love, and it overflows. She does not need to be fixed. She is the healer, and the love that will come now, if it comes, will not complete her. It will witness her. It will sit beside her fire, not try to dim it. And if no one comes, that's okay too, because her joy is no longer dependent. It is sovereign. She doesn't need to be understood anymore. She needs to be undisturbed. She doesn't want to be admired from afar. She wants to be met in the middle, where eye meets eye, soul meets soul, and no one is pretending. She no longer speaks to be agreed with. She speaks because truth, when unspoken, begins to rot. And her truth is ripe. She is not here to fit. She is here to remember. Remember the woman before the roles, before the rings, before the routines that became cages. She is not a phase. She is the threshold. If you fear her, it's because you still fear your own depth. If you try to tame her, it's because you haven't yet met your own wild. She is the wolf that left the pack, the flame that chose the cave, the river that changed its course. She doesn't need a title. She doesn't need a label. Call her what you will. She will keep walking. And in her steps, you'll find the path back to yourself, if you're brave enough to follow. She no longer tries to soften herself for comfort. She is not silk. She is salt. She preserves. She stings. She heals. She is medicine that burns before it soothes. And those who have not yet tasted truth will call her bitter. But those who've lived enough to crave the real will recognize her by the steadiness of her gaze, by the gentleness of her no, by the way her silence says everything. She doesn't want a crowd. She wants presence. She doesn't want loud declarations. She wants one moment of realness so honest it breaks open the skin and lets the soul breathe. She is not looking to be followed. She is not building a kingdom. She is becoming a temple, and not everyone is meant to pray at her altar. Because her energy is no longer free, it is earned by those who move slowly, speak honestly, touch with reverence. Because this version of her, the one born after the ashes, after the forgetting, after the fall, this version is not available to those who still trade intimacy for attention. She doesn't need to be seen in public. She needs to be held in truth. And if that scares you, walk away now. Because she no longer invites those who are not ready to stay. She has no room for maybe, no patience for potential. She wants depth. She wants devotion. She wants sacred slowness. If you cannot sit with her silence, you cannot stand in her storm. She is the prayer she once whispered for someone else to be. And now, she is the answer, not for the world, for herself. She does not walk away with fireworks. She walks away like dusk, quiet, certain, turning everything to gold in her wake. She does not need a stage. She needs a moment, a breath, a return, because her story is not a performance, it is a reclamation. And now, she carries herself differently, not higher, not louder, but deeper. She enters a room and doesn't need to speak, because the air already knows her name. She sits in silence, and yet the space vibrates with truth. She no longer offers explanations. She offers presence. She no longer offers herself to be saved. She offers herself to be witnessed by those who can see with more than eyes. And if you are still listening, still here, perhaps this was never just about her. Perhaps it was about you, the woman inside you that has been holding her breath. The one who always knew she was meant for something more honest than what the world offered. The one who learned to perform fine, who smiled through hollowness, who called it love when it was survival. And maybe, just maybe, she is stirring now. Maybe she heard this voice and whispered, "That's me." Maybe she's not waiting anymore. Maybe she's ready to rise. Not with anger, but with clarity. To stand without asking. To speak without softening. To choose herself, finally, fully, sacredly. And if that is true, let this not be the end. Let this be the breath before the becoming. Let this be your echo, your altar, your mirror. Because you are not broken. You are becoming. You are not behind. You are arriving. You are not invisible. You are intact. Intacta, that's our word. Not because you were never hurt, but because even hurt could not dismantle the soul you carry. Even disappointment could not dim your light forever. Even silence could not erase your fire. You are still here, and that means you are still whole. If these words met something sacred inside you, if they stirred a memory, a longing, a yes so soft it nearly hurt, share this message. Not for virality, but for remembrance. Send it to a woman who once forgot her own name. Tag someone who needs to be reminded that healing isn't loud. It's holy. And in the comments, write your own return. What truth are you ready to reclaim? What mask are you ready to drop? What old name are you ready to stop answering to? Because this is where the new begins, not in change, but in truth. If you wish to walk with us, in silence, in strength, in soul, subscribe, not by habit, but by choice, because something sacred happened here, and sacred things deserve space.